Okay, let's unpack this. Picture this. It's early 2025. You grab your phone, maybe first thing, open TikTok.
Yeah.
And bam, instead of your feed, you get messages saying it's temporarily unavailable in the U.S.
Wow.
Right, that sudden blackout just caused chaos, confusion, people scrambling to other apps, and just so many questions.
What on earth happened?
Yeah, exactly. What did that moment really signify, and what's it tell us about, the future of social media, where you connect online?
Well, that dramatic shutdown was really just the climax of a story that had been building for years.
Right.
So today we're doing a deep dive into these ongoing attempts by the U.S. government to restrict or even ban TikTok. We're going to explore the different layers here.
Okay.
The reasons why they took these actions,
Yeah.
how the platform actually works,
Yeah.
makes its money, and maybe most importantly, the real-world impact this whole thing has on millions of users and creators.
And to sort of guide us through this whole tangle, we've pulled together a bunch of sources. We've got news reports covering the laws, that crazy shutdown back in January, a business analysis that really digs into how TikTok makes its, well, frankly, massive revenue, some historical context, Wikipedia-type stuff on past government actions, the criticisms, and also a look from places like Forbes at what this actually means for content creators on the ground.
Right. So our mission here with this deep dive is basically to sort through all that, pull out the different viewpoints, understand the core arguments, the key events that got us here.
Yeah.
And really, what does it mean for you? Your data, your ability to connect, maybe even your job, and, the whole digital world around us.
All right, let's get into it then, because like you said, this didn't just happen out of the blue in 2025. This road to the ban, it's actually a pretty long timeline.
Absolutely. The U.S. government's concerns about TikTok, they started way earlier than a lot of people might think.
How early are we talking?
Sources mention that as far back as 2019, the U.S. Army and the Navy had already banned TikTok on government devices.
2019.
Yeah. Citing security risks even then.
That was like years before it really exploded for a lot of people. And then came the first really big attempt at a ban, right? 2020.
Yeah.
Trump administration.
Yes. That's when things really escalated. The administration publicly called TikTok a national security threat, issued an executive order, basically telling ByteDance, the Chinese parent company, to sell off its U.S. side within 90 days.
And ByteDance, they didn't just roll over, did they?
No, not at all. Sources say they sued the government straight away, argued the order was, unconstitutional, politically motivated. And they even said at one point they'd rather shut down completely in the U.S. than sell their core algorithm. That secret sauce behind the For You page.
Right, that algorithm is everything to them.
Exactly. Well, that first executive order hit legal roadblocks pretty fast. A court blocked it. And then the Biden administration actually reversed it in 2021.
Okay, so a pause, but not the end of it.
Not by a long shot.
Yeah.
Just a pause. Because the concerns, they just kept simmering, kept building.
Right. What came next?
Well, we saw the No TikTok on Government Devices Act actually become law in December 2022. So a formal ban on federal devices.
Okay.
And sources were reporting ongoing scrutiny, like DOJ and FBI investigations in March 2023. There were allegations, reportedly, that the company had improperly accessed user data, even potentially spying on journalists.
Oof. Okay. And Congress was busy too, right? Trying different angles?
Definitely. Various bills were floating around, some aiming for a straightforward nationwide ban.
Yeah.
Others were broader, like the Restrict Act. That was designed to give the government powers over tech coming from foreign adversaries.
So it really was this kind of slow burn, legislative moves, executive actions, building up pressure over years.
Precisely. That drumbeat of concern was just constant. It really set the stage for what happened in 2025.
Okay, so let's dig into the why. What is the main reason, the core concern the U.S. government keeps pointing to?
The number one reason, you see it cited everywhere in the sources, it boils down to potential user data collection. And the possibility of influence operations, both linked back to the government of the People's Republic of China.
Because of ByteDance.
Exactly. Because TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, is based in China.
Okay, so it's that connection, but what's the specific worry? How could that link actually be a threat?
Well, the main argument, as U.S. officials lay it out, is that under China's national security laws, ByteDance could theoretically be forced to hand over U.S. user data to the Chinese government if they asked for it.
Ah, okay. Compelled by law.
Right. And sources add details like Chinese companies legally have to have these in-house Communist Party committees, which critics say could be a channel for government influence or, insight. Plus, there's this other big concern. Could the Chinese government potentially use TikTok's algorithm, which is incredibly powerful to influence Americans, especially younger users, maybe by boosting some content, suppressing other content, shaping opinions.
Okay, I mean, that sounds like a pretty serious potential vulnerability, if it's real. But here's the thing. Based on the sources we looked at, has the U.S. government actually shown concrete proof, like public evidence that this has happened?
And that's where things get really debated.
Yeah.
It's a crucial counterpoint in the sources.
Yeah.
Multiple sources really stress this. U.S. officials haven't publicly presented definitive evidence that the Chinese government has accessed specific U.S. user data via TikTok, or that they've actively influenced content on the platform.
So it's more theoretical.
Cybersecurity experts are even quoted, reportedly, describing these national security concerns, at least in terms of proven breaches, as largely hypothetical at this stage.
And you can bet critics jump all over that, saying it's hypocritical to single out TikTok.
They absolutely do. Critics argue, look, the focus on TikTok seems way out of proportion when you compare it to, say, U.S. surveillance programs, like FISA Section 702.
Right. The warrantless surveillance stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which allows surveillance of non-U.S. folks, but, as critics point out, can easily sweep up data from Americans talking to those folks. And they also point to, all the other social media companies, tech giants, collecting massive amounts of user data, selling it, often with very little oversight, sometimes even to government agencies.
So the argument is, if data privacy and government access are the real issues, why only TikTok?
Pretty much. They say these aren't unique problems to TikTok, and other platforms get a much easier ride.
It definitely adds complexity. Okay, before we jump back into the ban drama itself, let's pause for a second. We need to understand what makes TikTok so valuable. Why is it worth this huge fight? How does it actually make money?
Yeah, that's totally key to understanding the stakes. And it really starts with just massive user engagement, almost unbelievable levels.
It really hooks you in.
It does. Sources say users spend, on average, close to an hour a day on the app. That's huge. And that's driven by that super smart recommendation algorithm we keep mentioning. It's designed purely to keep you scrolling, showing you stuff it thinks you'll like.
And in the digital world, attention equals money.
Exactly. User attention is the main currency. And TikTok has just cornered the market on it.
Yeah.
Especially for advertisers.
So by 2025, you've got over 1 billion monthly users globally. That's a goldmine for ads.
Absolutely. So the main ways TikTok cashes in are, 1, advertising, brands paying big bucks to reach that huge, engaged audience, and 2, in-app purchases.
Like the gifts.
Primarily those digital gifts people buy and send to creators during live streams. Sources say TikTok keeps a hefty chunk of that gift money, reportedly around 50%, which has helped make it one of the highest grossing apps anywhere, just based on what users spend.
But it's not just ads and gifts anymore, right? It feels like they're building something bigger.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, maybe even kicked into high gear by this ban threat, is how fast they're diversifying. Building out new revenue streams, all on top of that user attention. Well, there's e-commerce, right? TikTok Shop. They take a cut of sales made through the app. They've launched music distribution services like SoundOn. They do deals with labels, media companies for promotions. Sources even mention they're looking at licensing their core tech.
And becoming more of a super app, doing everything.
They're kind of like you see with successful apps in Asia. They're trying out features for resumes, little mini games, payment systems, all inside TikTok. Plus TikTok TV apps. The core idea seems to be, facing this threat in their biggest market, they're trying to own more of the value chain. Move beyond just grabbing your attention to actually handling your shopping, your music, maybe even your job search, all within their world.
Okay, that context is super important, knowing what's really at stake. So let's get back to the timeline. The moment that ban threat became very, very real, tell us about the showdown with that law. The fact.
Right. The Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary-Controlled Applications Act, PFACA, that was the law Congress passed, Biden signed. It set a hard deadline. ByteDance had to sell TikTok's U.S. operations by January 19th, 2025, or face a ban.
And TikTok fought it in court.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Argued it violated the First Amendment. Free speech, primarily.
Did the courts move fast on that?
They did. Sources say the Supreme Court actually upheld the law's constitutionality before the January 19th deadline hit.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. The lower court had kind of wrestled with the free speech part earlier. They basically said, yes, the law affects speech, but its goal, blocking potential foreign censorship or influence, that actually supports the First Amendment spirit by protecting the information environment, essentially.
So the legal challenges failed before the deadline. What happened on January 18th, 2025?
ByteDance didn't budge. They refused to sell. So the ban provisions in the law kicked in. On that evening, Saturday, January 18th, TikTok just went dark for U.S. users.
What did that look like?
It got pulled from the app stores, Apple, Google, and inside the app itself, social features just stopped working. No uploading, no viewing profiles, even the For You page went dead. Just error messages saying the service was inaccessible, and sources noted other ByteDance apps got hit too.
Okay, now here's where it gets really wild. Because that blackout, it didn't last long.
Okay.
And a familiar face got involved.
That's right. Super surprising twist. Donald Trump, who, remember, tried to ban TikTok back in 2020.
Yeah.
He suddenly emerged as a potential, savior for TikTok right around that January 19th deadline.
Why the change of heart?
Well, some sources speculate it might have been influenced, partly anyway, by Jeff Yass, a big ByteDance investor.
Interesting. Okay, so the app goes dark Saturday night. How did it come back so fast?
Service came back relatively quickly on the 19th. According to sources, TikTok told service providers like internet carriers that they gotten assurances from Trump's team. Assurances that they wouldn't face penalties for keeping TikTok running, despite the law.
But the app stores were still hesitant.
Initially, yeah. Apple and Google apparently held back from relisting the app. Some lawmakers were warning them, hey, you could be liable for helping a banned app.
Then came the official White House move to make it, well, official-ish.
Exactly. January 20th. Trump's first day back in office, he signs an executive order, creates a 75-day non-enforcement period for that PFACA law.
Blind time.
Basically.
Yeah.
He also talked about maybe a liability shield for companies working with TikTok and said his administration wanted a deal, something like 50% U.S. ownership.
And the app stores came back online?
His acting attorney general sent letters to Apple, Google, etc., promising no fines or legal action during this 75-day window. And that did the trick. TikTok was back in the app stores around February 13th.
So fast forward to April 2025. Where are things now? Still in limbo?
Pretty much. As of early April, that first 75-day period, it got extended another 75 days. So kind of kicking the can down the road again.
Is a deal close?
Sources were saying a potential deal looked close at one point, ByteDance keeping a minority stake. But then, apparently, it fell apart after Trump imposed some new tariffs on China, unrelated trade stuff.
Wow.
Which just shows, right? TikTok's fate is still tangled up in those bigger U.S.-China political and economic tensions. And meanwhile, those lawsuits against the ban by ByteDance and the creators still working their way through the courts.
Okay, let's shift focus from the, high-level politics and law to the people. The millions of people whose lives, maybe even jobs, were thrown into chaos by that shutdown and all this uncertainty. What does this mean for content creators?
Yeah, this is the really crucial human side of it all. For so many creators, TikTok isn't just fun. It's a major income source.
Right. Brand deals, platform payout.
Exactly. Directing traffic to their own businesses. A ban, or even just the constant threat of a ban, it creates huge instability. It could literally wipe out their income stream overnight.
And it's not like you can just flip a switch and move your whole audience somewhere else, right?
Oh, absolutely not. Building that following, that trust, on Instagram or YouTube Shorts or wherever, it takes serious time and effort. Creators usually have way smaller audiences on other platforms, and they have to figure out totally different content styles, algorithms. It's a massive learning curve.
What about the brands? Are they getting nervous pulling back from creators because of this?
Interestingly, sources suggest the opposite was expected for 2025. Brands were actually planning to increase spending on creators, 93% said they planned to spend more.
Okay.
The thinking seems to be. Brands value the creator's connection with the audience more than the specific platform. The channel itself is less important.
So creators just need backup plans.
Pretty much. They need contingency plans ready for their brand campaigns.
Yeah.
Be prepared to say, okay, TikTok's down, let's shift this to Instagram stories or YouTube Shorts instead.
So what's the main advice then for creators caught in this storm?
Experts are really hammering this home. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't rely entirely on one social media platform you don't control. This whole ban saga is like a giant flashing warning sign. The advice is diversify. Treat yourself like a media company. Build revenue streams off the platforms, courses, events, products, an email list, something you own.
Right.
Some experts see this whole thing as almost a necessary wake-up call, pushing creators to build a real brand, a real business, outside of TikTok or any single app. create a safe home base for their audience, rather than being totally dependent on an algorithm or, geopolitics.
It's a hard lesson in, like, digital resilience.
It really is, yeah.
So wrapping things up, let's just zoom out one last time, remind ourselves of the wider context, some of the criticisms we mentioned. It wasn't just the federal government acting here, right?
Correct. Before PFACA even passed, lots of individual U.S. states, universities too, had already banned TikTok on their own government or campus devices, citing those same security concerns.
And China. How did the Chinese government react publicly to all this pressure on one of its biggest global tech success stories?
Well, publicly, they opposed the U.S. law, called it unfair, discriminatory. Sources say they did some lobbying in the U.S., told their state media to paint ByteDance positively.
Ugh.
But, considering how big a deal this was, their public response was maybe somewhat muted, according to sources. Not a huge diplomatic firestorm, relatively speaking.
And ByteDance's stance on selling? Still the same as back in 2020?
Seems so. Their stated preference, if really forced, is still shutting down in the U.S. over selling that core algorithm.
Which China considers sensitive tech.
Exactly. China sees the algorithm itself as valuable technology, subject to their own export control laws, which would probably complicate any forced sale involving the algorithm anyway.
And the legal challenges, as we said, are still grinding on.
Definitely. Both ByteDance, TikTok, and that separate group of creators, their lawsuits trying to overturn PFACA are still active in the courts.
Okay, and just to circle back on the criticisms one last time, beyond the lack of public evidence point and the free speech arguments, what other reasons do critics suggest might be driving this push for a ban?
Well, beyond the stated security concerns, some critics definitely suggest political motives are involved.
Like what?
Sources mention arguments that part of the push might be about trying to suppress certain kinds of content that maybe gain more traction on TikTok than on other platforms.
Such as?
Things like discussions around the Israel-Palestine conflict, or maybe other viewpoints that TikTok's algorithm amplifies differently compared to, say, Meta's platforms.
Yeah.
The idea being maybe some politicians don't like the conversations happening there.
So when you pull it all together, this deep dive really shows that TikTok's story in the U.S. is just incredibly complicated. It's this messy knot of national security fears, genuine free speech debates, huge geopolitical tensions.
Yeah, and fierce domestic politics. The sheer value of this massive global business built on attention, and of course the real lives and jobs of millions of creators and businesses wrapped up in it all.
It truly is like a snapshot of these huge forces shaping our digital world right now. It pits these fears about foreign influence, data security against core principles like free expression, and just the economic reality of this thriving global platform.
Every form that connects people, lets them create, lets them make money.
So, given all the twists and turns, the ongoing court cases, the way it's tied to bigger political fights, what does this whole saga make you think about the future for these big cross-border digital platforms?
It really throws up some huge, provocative questions, doesn't it? Can these truly global social media companies operating in hundreds of countries ever really be independent from national governments, from geopolitical rivalries? And maybe the bigger question, how much control should any government have over the platforms that you use every single day to connect, to create, maybe even to earn a living? Definitely something to chew on as you navigate this increasingly complex digital world.